This is a Labour Lives interview with Cllr Tony Kennedy, who is the councillor in Birmingham for the Sparkbrook Ward. The Birmingham City Council details illustrate or say that you first became a councillor in 2011. Yeah. Well, that's wholly incorrect, because you've been knocking around a bit longer than that. So perhaps you could take us back and tell us when you first stood for the Labour Party, where and what you've done for the in terms of elected politics.
Okay, I first stood for Labour, I think, in 1986, which was the year before the 87 general election in Sheldon. We lost that, but I think kept the Lib Dem out that year, and did okay for Labour. I was agent in a number of places. Foxhollies I was the branch secretary for about 16 years, I think it was. So I was very active there. There were two available by-elections coming up in 92, and one of those was in Foxhollies, and I stood down trying to support my colleague Mike Nangle for it. Eventually it was Stan Yap that was chosen. Some colleagues blamed me for not standing in that one, because I knew that Sparkbrook was going to become available the following year with Khalid Mahmood, who's now the MP for Handsworth, was the councillor for Sparkbrook, and I knew that he'd gone to Kuwait to pursue his engineering business because of the First Gulf War, and I knew that he would be standing down in Sparkbrook, and there was an opportunity for me to stand there, which is what I duly did. So I was elected in a by-election in 1993 for Sparkbrook. Unfortunately, at that time, there was a manoeuvring by people of the what would then be considered the hard left to get rid of Roy Hattersley, and to position certain people for that purpose, and I was in their way. I had done the work to win Single Regeneration Budget Round 2 and a programme called Urban, European programme. So there's a total of 60 million quid involved in that. I'd promoted a thing called the Sparkbrook Commission. We had literally thousands of people involved in developing plans for the area. However, I was only in for a year. Mick Rice then got the seat, and the people who got a hold of the SRB programme, they then...
We're talking still about Sparkbrook now?
Yes, yeah.
So
Sparkbrook.
We've got you coming in an election in 1993.
Yes.
So by-election at that point.
Yes.
As you say, Khalid Mahmood stands down, is that
yes,
right?
That's...
You win the election. You then remain in place for a year until 1994.
Yes.
And you were then deselected, or what?
No, there was a very odd set of circumstances in that the branch had pre-selected for 94 Comrade Mick Rice prior to the by-election being announced. There were other people who'd also anticipated these changes and managed to get into that position. So I ended up being unable to challenge at that time. I'd also been expelled from the Co-Operative Party the year before for subverting the course of the parliamentary selection in Small Heath, or that was the spurious allegation. So I had an interesting little period at that time.
Would this be the election or the nomination involving Roger Godsiff MP?
Yes, indeed, yes. Yeah.
In 1992, that was?
That was the nomination. Yeah.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Because there were 4 candidates, and it was often thought that the local candidate, the present councillor Mohammed Afzal, would get that seat, but didn't get nominated. If my memory is right about these matters.
I can't remember accurately. There was also Najma Hafiz was after. I think she got 3 votes in this election. I think he did get some votes, but
I think he was extremely close. In fact, probably if my memory is right, he in fact would have won if it had not been for affiliated members of unions who were allowed at that point to be affiliated to the local CLP and to vote.
Well, I think this was the reason I was expelled, because the Co-op Party held 13% of the Electoral College, and I was the secretary of the South East Birmingham Co-op branch. And I made the mistake of trying to uphold the rules and constitution of the Co-op Party at that point. There were some people who organised meetings. At that point, you didn't need a time of 6 months or a year qualification to vote within the Co-op. And the then regional organiser claimed he had the right to hold the votes, and we said we wanted to assert what was in the rule book and have it done locally. However, I wasn't involved in any campaign to against Roger. I was in campaign to try and uphold the rules of the party. The strange thing was, Dick Knowles was my agent in 93 in Sparkbrook. This was while I was councillor in Sparkbrook, and I was on holiday in Ireland for a couple of weeks, and a meeting was organised by other members of the Co-op, not myself. I had nothing to do with it. At the Cottage of Content in Sparkbrook, when 28 new members were recruited, and they were subsequently intending to vote against or to use this 13% in the Electoral College. Somehow it got tied up that I was involved in organising this meeting when I was in fact staying in Ireland in Ennis with the Mayor of Ennis in County Clare, who's I was over there. I was actually watching it over there for a rugby game, and his nephew was the Ireland captain, Kieran Fitzgerald, I think it was at the time. And so when it came to the Co-op expulsion or the hearing, there were two of us, Andrew Lydon, who you'll know in Hall Green, who went to prison over this matter, and myself were expelled separately. But Dick Knowles was my witness and my agent, and when we came to the hearing, Dick said, you don't think they're going to pay any attention to the evidence, do you, comrade? I said, well, no. I wasn't really concerned one way or another. I'd got a letter from the Mayor of Ennis to say on the night in question, Councillor Kennedy was staying with me at my guest house in Ennis, signed the Mayor of Ennis. And the Co-op Party then had ruled that evidence from Ireland wasn't admissible in a Co-op Party hearing. So I was expelled from the Co-op Party, which I continued to be for another 20 years until I got re-elected. And now I'm the chair of the Birmingham and Solihull Co-Operative Party. So it's come full circle.
One hopes the rules have been somewhat amended in terms of hearings of those sorts.
I think you can say things have moved on in that time.
Right, so we've talked about Mick Rice.
Yes.
He becomes the local councillor then for Sparkbrook.
Yes.
Fine. So when do you next have an opportunity to go... Oh, I should have said, of course, what was it like the first time you got elected, and what was the process like? Did you find it daunting, a good experience, or...
Well, I suppose, but by that time I was a very experienced campaigner, and Sparkbrook, I hadn't wanted to stand in Foxhollies when I would have been a shoo-in for that selection because of what I don't unkindly call dog mess issues. Sparkbrook is, a community with everything you could possibly imagine for an inner city area, and plenty of issues to get stuck into. And to help with, so that's what I wanted, and that's what I did. 3 years later, in '97, there was another by-election, this time in Aston, and I got the selection for that. Again, it was a regional. It was the last year of another person's term who died. 26 people went for interview for that particular selection. People always say, well, how did I get it? And I always say, I can only put it down to good looks, because it was there were currents within the party that were in my favour, you might say, and I got that. That seat was up again the following year, and again it was lively. We ended up in election court on both occasions. But so at one stage in '98, I'd been elected 3 times, but only served 2 years. So that was an interesting position to be in. When I got elected first in Sparkbrook, I had, and Dick Knowles was the leader at that time, and I'd got elected on a promise of 100 days of action. And this 100 days of action, as I said, involved creating what became a very large-scale process for this Sparkbrook Community Commission, with lots of planning for real and visioning and looking at particular areas, and the then urban renewal programme, which was still only kicking in some respects. The housing was dreadful in some areas. There were street prostitution was still rife. The drug dealing was rife. There was a perfect storm in some locations. Cheddar Road, you mentioned earlier. I used to go to I had a Morris Traveller, and on occasions I had to take my daughters, who were then very young, I think 7 or 8 years old, to residents' meetings in the middle, a particular house in Cheddar Road, when the women were all sitting in the front windows in the state of dress that they were in, and so my daughters had interesting discussions after the next day. What did you do last night? And they were, there were ladies sitting in the front room in their knickers, and so they couldn't understand. So it was a very lively period, and that 100 days led to the opportunity, because SRB2 was being announced, Single Regeneration Budget 2, Round 2, which was £50-odd million, and this urban, a further 8 million. So Sparkbrook was ready to take advantage. In fact, we were so ready that it was the only place in the city that could have done it. So it was basically the work I did in that 100 days, and that first year I had that won that resource. I did have a salutary lesson about the machinations of the Labour Party, where other people have other ideas. So when I got re-elected in Aston in 97, and again in 98, again a similar area, and an opportunity came there with what became the New Deal for Communities under the Labour government, which was another big area-based regeneration programme, £54 million this time. This time it was agreed that the communities of the city themselves would vote for each other's presentation, and I suppose, well, I did. I picked the presentation team. I asked the local vicar if he'd lead it. We had our vicar out-vicared the other vicars, put it that way. And we had a presentation with elderly people and young people and people from different communities, and we got some African Caribbean artists who were from the locality to put it all to music and poetry. So the presentations and the voting that went on was very much a kind of jeu sans frontières, people voting for each other but not for yourself. And so we accumulated the votes from other parts of the city. We did the deals during the breaks and got the community vote for the whole city. And then that was it. Aston Pride came into being. And that too had an evolution that led eventually, there was a lot of good that came out of it, but community-led processes invariably involve people trying to assert agendas and so on that are inappropriate. So eventually that board got itself into a situation where they wanted to control all of the money and the assets, and I had to go to the MP through the Minister of State, and I went to Albert to say we've got to get rid of this board, and that's what we did. We got rid of that board. Other people have a misrepresentation of what happened at that point, but I was certainly protecting the public interest and the party interest in that. So all of my experiences where you have large amounts of public funds that are available in neighbourhoods. All manner of people come out of the woodwork, some with good intentions and others not.
So how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis if we talk about the concept of devolution or bringing monies from the centre down into local districts and stuff? Should it just be with the politicians and these people shouldn't be involved, these other partners, or what? Do you have to vet them, or how does it work?
I think I genuinely think nobody's ever got this perfect. I spend a lot of time looking at I've chaired major regeneration boards, and I chaired the regeneration boards for Saltley Small Heath and for Sparkbrook Sparkhill and for the east of the city and for Aston Pride and the Finance Committee, and all of them have had kind of similar experiences. Some very worthy work, but where funds are susceptible to being channeled into projects of dubious benefit, then there does tend to be efforts to do just that. If funds are susceptible to that kind of influence, they will be attempting to do that. So there's a balance, and I think that we have to hold the ring in the public interest, and the public interest comes with experience and balance and checks and balances. And one of my current takes on that is to ask who brings stuff to the table rather than who takes stuff from the table. In other words, who's bringing, who's got a good heart and wanting to do effective stuff in the community, and who simply wants to continue a business.
At that time, what sort of offices did you hold in the council as such? What sort of committees did you sit on, and that sort of stuff?
At the Aston period, I didn't hold executive office. However, we didn't call them cabinet members either. I think we called them lead members for regeneration. At that time, we had 4 assistants to those individuals, and I was one of the assistants. So I was delegated some serious responsibilities. Really, I was the co-chair of the East Birmingham and North Solihull Regeneration Zone. Together with the leader of Solihull was the other co-chair, so I was very much mandated by the I'll call them cabinet member for the sake of argument, to do just that, and I certainly got the officers and Birmingham to collaborate very strongly with Solihull, and that programme, I believe, remains the best regeneration programme in the country right now, with what it's done with North Solihull, albeit this government have taken the resources away to do much of what it was trying to achieve. But the Tory, lovely people from Solihull, when we had our first meetings, and said to me as the representative of Birmingham, what will you support us to do? And I simply said, whatever you want. We will support you with whatever it is that you want. And I think the Conservative leader of Solihull and his colleagues were slightly surprised by this. What seemed perfectly obvious to me, that we could only do what the priorities were for each other, and that, I think, has developed into the situation now where the leader of Solihull is in fact the chair of the combined authority. So we've got a Conservative government, we've got a Conservative leader there. We had this relationship that's evolved, I think, and I helped that. I helped develop that. So that's something I'm quite happy with.
Did you then move up the food chain, so to speak, in terms of the council, or what about, were you getting? Because Aston would seem to me a rock solid place for you to be. So how do you come back to be back in Sparkbrook? Is that a story that is worth telling?
Well, yes. Well, there was one thing I did do. I got mandated to be the lead member for innovation and new technology, and that I think led to what is now the Service Birmingham contract, and I could describe that if you like in a few moments. But no, I became I was a scrutiny chair in 2003-04. I was chair of the Education and Arts Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So that
this would be when was the alliance between the Tories and the Liberal Democrats?
No, it's before that.
Oh, before that?
Yeah.
They took over in 2004?
Yes.
Right.
The 2004 was boundary changes. And
that was a very bad year for Labour.
Yes, and it was a bad year for well, it was a bad year. That was the year of the postal vote business. And the boundaries had all changed, so Aston changed, and I got selected to stand in the Whitton bit with Perry Barr. So that was a bit of deja vu game, standing there after 20 odd years. And we narrowly lost, or Mike Leddy narrowly lost that year by 31 votes. I had some personal publicity experiences that I wouldn't wish to repeat, but they entirely misrepresented certain things that happened. But I'd been the chair of the scrutiny committee. We did some very good work. Tim Brighouse, I'd worked very closely with, and then the subsequent director that was appointed was appointed with my support. But I suppose it was my role in this. I was chairing regeneration boards. I chaired at the same time. I chaired East Birmingham. I chaired Saltley Small Heath Regeneration Board and Sparkbrook Sparkhill Regeneration Board. So I chaired all three at the same time, and I suppose that was largely because of my experience in being able to hold the ring in each of these geographies with all of the stuff that goes on within them.
So we've got the 2004 election. You lose at Whitton, is that right?
Yes.
When did you then get back onto the council again?
It's 2011.
So there's a 5-year gap.
Yes.
No, more than that. Yeah, I can't do the maths very well, can I? So there's quite a big gap.
Yeah.
You're still involved, obviously, in the Labour Party.
Yes.
Still active.
Yeah.
And you come back to your old stomping ground, surprisingly, Sparkbrook.
Yes, I became...
Because, of course, Sparkbrook had got a history then by that time of having respect candidates respect councillors, not just candidates. Yes. And at one point, the Hall Green district was a totally different beast than it is nowadays, with 11 Labour people at the moment and 1 Liberal Democrat. I think there were periods of time when there were virtually no Labour candidates or no Labour figures virtually on the district in certain parts of the place.
Well, there was one that survived throughout Councillor Fazil in
of course, I'd forgotten
Springfield or Sparkhill as was. So that I think by 2008 I became constituency secretary at a point where the Respect had come close to winning. In the I can't remember now, 2005, and they held all 3 seats in Sparkbrook. I became constituency secretary. We had 1 Labour councillor, and then in 2010 we had we narrowly held on through strong campaigning. I was by that time working on the ground in Sparkbrook very heavily. There were 3 respect councillors. They were very deeply dug in, big operations, massive kind of public meetings that would be, some of the councillors, Salma in particular, very good at rousing large numbers of people. And of course you had the background of the whole Iraq war and so on, and this motley, in my view, synergy called Respect, which was an abuse of Islam, I have to say. a hard left Trotskyist melting pot together with some populist street politics, and that kind of concoction was what was in play in Sparkbrook. Labour had been seriously beaten over several years, and my colleague Cllr John had lost several times, and literally nobody wanted to stand in 2011 because they thought we'd be defeated. I sat in my garden outside here with the constituency chair and myself and regional organiser and Cllr John, and discussed who should be the candidate for 2011, and I said to the other, any of you could do it. Nobody wanted to do it, so I did it. Now I knew I would win. I knew the mobilisations that I could undertake, because by that time I was very experienced in encouraging all sections of the community, and what I think people don't understand is that the political popularity and mobilising people is around being seen to be fair to every community and being effective at organising and mobilising people to help get those people to vote. So we put in an awful lot of hard work, and in that particular election between Christmas and May, we three of us, more or less, with the odd other person helping, delivered 100,000 leaflets. I got very fit at that time. My partner's very good at that sort of thing, and Cllr. So the three of us were pounding the streets all day, every day. Indeed, my partner is very good at this. Made me get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, leaflet until lunchtime. We had half an hour at lunchtime, and then again till 9 o'clock at night when I was allowed to stop. So we did that every day for months. So subsequently on election day that year, we had committee rooms in many different communities. We had a mobilisation amongst the Irish community. There were 13 pubs unavailable to respect candidates for, I think, obvious reasons. Each of those had mobilisations. I'd done the same in Aston, by the way, in previous years. I had the support of different religious or ethnic communities. There were 186 Sikhs. I think 90% of them voted Labour. Similarly for Bangladeshi, Yemeni, Irish, English, Chinese, people with relations in Highgate. We had, strangely, we had people from other parts of the city organising votes in Sparkbrook through their family and kinship networks. So when it came to election day, the count was interesting. The first box out was down on the Alexandra estate, and we got 90% of that vote, as usual, a small box. The second vote out was the Montgomery box, the biggest respect box, and we were even Stevens, and I turned straight away. I said we'd won, and we won by 980 votes, and that was the occasion when Salma, the Montgomery box came out, then a couple of other boxes, and then the big boxes from the 7 streets in Borswell Heath were coming out, and I think that the Respect people thought we were going to do really well here. Well, they opened it up and it was 3-1 to us, and Salma went into a corner then that night and unfortunately became ill afterwards and resigned her seat. She's thankfully better now.
the interesting thing about all of this is that you, at some point, decide, or at least you don't decide, you want to be reselected. And having done a brilliant campaign, in your own words, worked very hard for months and months, very limited amount of people in terms of the early part of the campaign, though you mobilised different groups as you've described. Why were there difficulties about your reselection? And why did it come that the regional office had to get involved, and the national office, and people get suspended? What's the backstory on that?
Well, there are some issues that are still in play that I think will have to remain confidential until they're played out, because I think there are legal implications that are still there. I took the first seat in 2011. There was then a by-election with Salma's resignation the same year, and in 2012 we picked up the 3 seats within the space of 12 months. Then there was a big influx. Respect disbanded themselves in Birmingham, which effectively was Sparkbrook, and a significant number of those ex-Respect members joined the Labour Party, and I don't mean this to be in any way misrepresenting, but I think there is a difference between the ex-Respect members that wanted to do a bit of good for their communities and for the neighbourhood and so on, and some others who are less altruistic.
So where do you stand on Salma Yaqub wanting to join the Labour Party?
She's entitled to her ambition, but having stood against Labour twice, having had the opportunity to back Labour at the last election and not doing so, and only leaving Respect because of the continued absurd, bizarre antics of George Galloway, she's shown no commitment to Labour's values or politics in my view, and Roger Godsip has written a letter to the National Executive which expresses this quite clearly, and I think Roger is entirely accurate. I think Salma has she's got many qualities, but she hasn't shown any commitment to supporting Labour yet.
And just finally, we're in the throes of the leadership campaign at Birmingham. Sir Albert Bohr resigned. Some say he was forced out. I'd like your view about what you saw the position of why he came to resign, and why you're backing Cllr John Clancy over and above the other candidates.
When I was re-elected in 2011, I have to go back to 1999. Albert was elected as leader in the first place with my support. I was instrumental in bringing round some votes to Albert, because I firmly believed that Teresa Stewart, who'd had the leadership for 5 years, just was simply not part of the modern times, and that Albert was a good successor. However, then when I got elected in 2011, I spoke to him at his garden party a couple of days later, and I said, "I'm sorry, Albert, I think you've done too long. Your style of politics is too centralised and controlling, and I think you should go." And I've never either wanted or expected to get position under Sir Albert since then. I think his time had played out. I think Albert's qualities around organisation, around the property development of preparing the city infrastructure for a different role to that it had under mass employment with the smokestack industries that we had, the big factories and so on. There was a job to do in transferring, the priorities of the city into establishing new businesses and new industries. However, that I think has got its own momentum now under whoever would continue that process, and the fairness, the participation, the distribution to the neighbour, to the opportunities to our neighbourhoods, to Sparkbrook, to other parts of the city, I think just had not become, was not Albert's priority. However, it is John's. So I think that we need to move on to a fresh era. I'm a strong believer in Labour's values and in cooperative values, cooperative, communal, collective values and structures. There are other parts, other places, other cities that are doing wonders in those regards. Labour in Birmingham hasn't done that under Sir Albert. A couple of colleagues and I introduced resolutions to secure a cooperative council. Those have never been taken. There are certain people, including Sir Albert, who are members of the Co-op Party, but have shown no interest in doing anything about it. So I think that we need to move on and to deliver on a whole range of new fronts. But that in particular is a focus for me.
At the present time, you are the district chair for Hall Green.
Mm-hmm.
Do you expect preferment under a John Clancy administration? And has it been offered to you?
I've supported John in his standing for leadership on each occasion that he's done it. Indeed, the first year I was elected, John stood for leader and I stood for deputy leader. That my standing for deputy was a statement, first of all, that there should be challenge in nobody's got a job for life, but secondly, that I don't think that the then deputy had the skills for the portfolio or parts of the portfolio that he possessed, in particular the IT, or what I've got a very strong interest in the capability of changing things through better use of data. And in fact, the Deloitte World Tech Review last year said that IT should be thought of as innovating together, not the widgets that make things work. And I don't think the city's had any concept of that, and the people in the positions to influence that have had any influence over it. The Service Birmingham contract, I think, is fatally flawed, commissioned under the previous administration. This year's Deloitte Tech Review says that the bodies should think in terms of data maturity, and that would consist of two things: of one, coping with the legacy of old systems and making them work as effectively as they could, but secondly, making the data fit for purpose for the future and using interoperability and so on. And frankly, the individuals who haven't had the opportunity to that, the current leadership, one, don't understand that, and two, can't do anything about it, and John will change that.
Is that a short answer for yes, I do expect preferment then?
No. If John had won a normal annual meeting, I would have expected some position, but I have behind me, you might see, a book called Cllr, and I'm very happy to play whatever role helps move us forward. Whether that's a significant central role, I will certainly act as a close confidant of John.
Well, the consigliere, of course, famously in The Godfather, went out and did the Godfather's dirty work for him. Is that something that you feel needs to be done in the Labour Party in Birmingham?
There are a lot of tasks that need to be done, and I think that we need to be fit for the future. We've got a dreadful Tory government. We've got a dreadful set of finances, the financial circumstances. We've got massive changes that are coming our way, and there's going to be, the people of Birmingham and our region are going to suffer really badly unless we do our best to create a future that's fit for Birmingham and for our people, and I'm quite confident I'll help John do that.
Are you confident he will win?
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Councillor Tony Kennedy, thank you for speaking to Labour Lives.
Thank you.